This week, I am sharing the first part of a two-part special interview with talent management executive Kevin Richie. Since I was wrapping up season 6, Kevin was recommended to me because of his expertise in developing and leading people, especially regarding the topics I covered in this past season. And it was an amazing opportunity to speak with him, so please enjoy this special episode. Welcome to the Finance Leader Podcast, where leadership is bigger than the numbers. I am your host, Stephen McLean. This is the podcast for developing leaders in finance and accounting. This is episode number 54. I have interviewed my first guest on the Finance Leader Podcast, and I'm very happy to bring the first part of that interview today. I spoke with talent management executive and expert Kevin Richie. Kevin was a great guest to have on the podcast as I wrap up season 6. During the season, I have talked about a lot of topics around your team culture, one that helps everyone be successful. I have talked about recruiting and hiring, onboarding, setting expectations, coaching, performance reviews, and the weekly team meeting. Kevin provided his perspective on these topics based on his experience and expertise. Now, in the second part of the interview, which I will share next week, we talk about what it means to be successful, so don't miss out on that. The first questions I asked Kevin was what leadership meant to him, and then his thoughts about the difference between leadership and management. Now, his answer was, and I quote, "For me, management, if you think of, for example, project management, that's about checking boxes. So I'm hitting milestones, I'm accomplishing tasks. Things are done on time, on budget. So it's really a checkmark exercise. Leadership, to me, is accomplishing all of that, but also inspiring the human beings that are on your team and helping them develop and grow as individual humans. That, to me, is the distinguishing feature between the two." End quote. Now, that's an awesome answer. I believe that great leaders make everyone around them better, and that is what we should be striving to achieve every day. So please enjoy part 1 of the interview with talent management executive Kevin Richie. Today on the Finance Leader Podcast, I have a special guest, Kevin Richie, who is an experienced executive and leader in the area of talent management. Kevin, you are an amazing guest to have on as I wrap up season 6, where I have been talking about team culture, setting expectations, and many other topics that you are familiar with. Welcome, Kevin, and thank you for joining me today.
Well, thanks, Stephen, for having me, and congratulations on wrapping up your season. That's terrific. Just for background, I've been in the talent management space for about 20 years. Consider myself a bit of a talent strategist. So what I mean by that is I help organizations get the most out of their people in terms of attracting them to the organization, developing them while they're there, and then helping them move on to whatever their next step might be. So do that through talent management work. So that's recruiting, that's training and development, that's individual coaching. I'm a certified coach through the International Coach Federation, which means I have a whole bunch of hours of training, and I've sat down for a 3-hour exam and had a lot of clients. So that's the other piece of what I do. And then individually, I think as someone who's managed others, really the phrase I would use there is a talent farmer. So for me, my job as a leader in any role I have is to replace myself, ultimately. And so for me to do that, I have to get that brilliance out of the people on my team and grow them so that they can replace me at some point.
Well, that sounds great. Thank you so much. You have quite a lot of experience in this area. So that's why it was really good to bring you on to kind of help me wrap up this season. So thank you so much for joining me. And definitely want to jump in and really want to talk about leadership. And on the Finance Leader Podcast, I focus a lot on leadership, especially with finance and accounting professionals, because what I believe is that we're already expected to know our technical side, but we're not so good on the leadership side. So let's talk about leadership for a moment. And what I want to ask you is, why do you think learning leadership is important, especially for that young team manager? When we try to talk about the impacts of leadership and moving from just that managing perspective and into a leadership perspective. So tell me about what you think about learning leadership and why it's so important.
Sure. One of the, I guess to back up, if I were to distinguish between management and leadership, they're used interchangeably. There's tons of books written using both words. And, frankly, if it were easy and simple, there'd be no reason for all those books. If people could just show up on Earth and do it well, there wouldn't be a lot of books about it. So clearly there's a need for us to do it better. For me, it's really important because ultimately you're impacting other human beings by being in a management chair or a leadership chair. The distinguishing, and you'll hear arguments around, are they the same? Are they different? Ultimately, for me, management, if you think of, for example, project management, that's about checking boxes. So I'm hitting milestones, I'm accomplishing tasks, things are done on time, on budget. So it's really a checkmark exercise. Leadership to me is accomplishing all of that, but also inspiring the human beings that are on your team and helping them develop and grow as individual humans. That to me is the distinguishing feature between the two. And for me, it's about serving those individual humans, helping remove obstacles for them, understanding them at a human level, so that when someone shows up to work and you're working on a project together and you notice that, Susie is just really not engaged today, it's knowing her well enough to be able to A, pick up the nonverbals, and then B, ask her about it. And then C, have enough trust between you for her to tell you what's going on. Because clearly something's going on. She's usually a high performer, and today she's just not showing up fully as herself, and that's impacting the work. So that would be the distinguishing feature for me. And, if you think about management or accomplishing tasks, you can use tools, whether they're digital tools or physical tools, building a house or whatever it might be. Those things tend to wear out over time or become obsolete, whereas human beings should be increasing in value over time for the organization. So to me, our job as leaders is to facilitate that increase in value over time. Does that help?
Oh, I completely agree. That sounds great. I think some of the one of the areas that we tend to overlook or forget is what you had mentioned about that servant leadership, and especially about removing those obstacles so that our team can succeed. And I think that's really the big piece of it is looking out for our team every day, removing those obstacles and setting them up for success every day. And I think that, again, thank you. That's probably one of the major aspects of transitioning from that, being that manager to that leader.
Yeah, and particularly as in that first notch in terms of leadership. So you go from an individual contributor to a manager of others. What you'll learn is all the skills that got you to that job are 90% of them are irrelevant. They're only relevant in the sense that you know the right questions to ask or the right path to take, but it really doesn't equip you to manage the human beings in terms of how you grow them, how do you manage conflict, how do you allocate resources. It's just a completely different skill set. And not to plug other things, but one of the things that really helped me was a book called Leadership Pipeline, and it talks about that transition. So individual contributor to manager of others, and then manager of managers, and so on. Twisting through those turns in terms of leadership really gave me a great lens by which to think about it. And it's somewhat of a dated book at this point, but the lessons are really still relevant to how you manage differently, how you work differently.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. No, I completely agree with what you're saying. Hey, so let's get into some of the other topics, especially what I covered during the season, and let's talk about a little bit on the recruiting and the hiring side. Now, team manager is always up against trying to fill roles on the team, And one of the things I've always been an advocate for, especially regarding, the finance and accounting field, because we're so heavy on the technical skills. But one of the things I advocate is the consideration of soft skills. So tell me about what you think about recruiting and hiring, consideration of soft skills versus hard skills. And how do you, as a team manager, what can you do to kind of shape working with HR on the type of candidates you get? And then once you get several candidates coming your way, how do you get that out? How do you get that out of the candidate? Again, first, that's soft skills versus hard skills.
Sure. So multiple layers, I think, of questions there. So I'll try to hit them in the order that would strike me as important. I've been doing talent acquisition for 15 plus, almost 20 years in some form or fashion, either managing teams or doing it myself. So, and I'm about to do another role focused on it to help a company turn theirs around. So recruitment ultimately answers three questions: can do, will do, and will fit. So can the person do the job, the technical skills? They've got their CPA, they've got 5 years of accounting experience or finance experience, or if they're in the finance space, they've got the skill set to come to the table and accomplish the role tasks. So that's one piece of it. Will do is, are they motivated? Do they get fired up in the morning to come in and do the work? What drives them in terms of doing it well? So that's a motivation question. What motivates you, candidate A, about this work? And then finally, it's will fit. Are they going to add to the team that I've already built or am building? And are they going to be a team builder, or are they going to be a team detractor? And that's a fit question. So if I'm going through the process of a typical recruitment, let's say you've got an open position, you've got a team of 5, one of those positions is open. Very first thing I'm going to do with you as a leader and me as an HR professional is say, what are you trying to accomplish? Because you might say, gosh, we've had some errors on some of the reporting that we've done, and I need a really strong, detail-oriented person for accountant 1. And then in another scenario, you might say, you know what? We had a really great person who was a great accountant, but the thing that they did the best was keep the team positive and motivated. So I'm really after that personality that's going to build trust in the team and have motivation built in the team. That's a completely different candidate profile than that detail-oriented technical expert. And so my first job as a recruiter is to ask you those questions. Often we call it the contracting conversation, or that get to know what we're after conversation with the recruiter. So from there, then I'll be able to start filling in the gaps in terms of can do, will fit. If I'm looking for that, to your point, that person who's higher on the soft skills and lower on the technical skills, because I really need that team motivator, an internal coach, then hopefully we've had that conversation. I'm going to go after those candidates. And when I'm screening as a recruiter, I'm going to listen for that. And then once I have the slate, I'm going to bring them to you, say, remember that conversation we had? You told me I was looking for this, this, and this. And then I bring you those great team motivators, and you start screening out the ones that aren't very good technically. Well, wait a minute, Stephen, we talked about this. You said it was okay to be not the technical introverted expert. So it's just that back and forth partnership with the hiring manager and the recruiter. So I'd say it's really important to have the conversation honestly, what you're really after and why you're after it, what you're trying to accomplish, and then be a partner. Give great feedback along the way as you get the candidates and say what was working and what wasn't. I've seen a lot of leaders, not just in finance and accounting, but in all spaces, where they say, not a fit. Okay. What wasn't a fit? Well, they didn't have SQL database experience. Okay. but that wasn't in the top 5 things you mentioned to me when we had our contracting conversation. So, be really aware of what you really want, and that'll help the recruiter bring you what you need.
Right. No, I completely agree with what you're saying, because I talk about that partnership that you should have with HR, so you can communicate with what you're looking for. And again, that soft skills versus hard skills, because I try to encourage managers to protect the team regarding the over the top hard skills, because you can really bring on an Excel expert, someone who knows how to use the software but can't get along with anybody else, can really come on the team.
Right.
And can actually destroy the team. And that leads into my next topic of team culture. And you already hit on it a bunch in what you were just talking about. And that's the importance of team culture. And when you're bringing on new team members, the consideration of how they're a fit within the culture. So tell me a little bit more about that, about how that's an influence when you're bringing on team members, and also regarding team culture, even with your team members that are still there, monitoring and making sure you're getting the team culture that you want.
Sure. So I think it would come to reality in a couple of ways. One, do you know your team culture? And so fundamentally to me, and I'll probably hit this in some of my answers over and over, so forgive me, but it's all about trust and building a culture of trust. There was a study done by Meyer, Shorman, and Davis. I think a couple of them were out of Notre Dame. This is back in 1995, and they built this integrative model of trust. And then they looked back 20 years after that, so mid 2000s, and they applied that model in multiple organizations, multiple functions, both at the individual human supervisor and manager level with their employees, as well as organizational levels. And the model is built on, I'd say, 3 pegs of a stool, 3 legs, not pegs. Benevolence, integrity, and competence. So benevolence, do I have your best interests in mind? Integrity, do I do what I say I'm going to do? And in some of the research, do we have a shared set of values? So if I value technical competence highly and soft skills low, and you have the opposite profile, that's going to decrease trust in our relationship. And then finally, competence. Do I actually know what the heck I'm talking about? Or if I don't, am I smart enough to send you to someone who does? So if you can, and you can use the BIC analogy, right? BIC razors, benevolence, integrity, competence. That's how I remember it. In evaluating any relationship in the team, they have to know that this person has my best interests in mind. They're going to do what they say they're going to do, and that they're competent at what they're doing. So culturally, I would first say, do you know your team? And the only way you'll know your team is if you have trust-built relationships with all of them. Now, bringing in a new person into that team is going to change the dynamics. One of the best ways from a recruitment standpoint is to have your team interview the candidates. I've been through both scenarios where I've been interviewed by the hiring manager and the executive level, maybe a peer or two, and then nobody on the team that I'm going to be managing. I've also been through the opposite model where I started with the team I was going to be managing, and then peers, and then the executive team. I would say if you want your future peers for this individual to be bought in, have them as part of the interview process, or at least a couple of your high performers, because they're going to tell you things and see things that you won't see as a leader. And it also, let's say that person is selected, they say, Stephen, Susie is great. She's a wonderful fit for our team. Well, Susie shows up and Susie struggles a little bit. They're going to have a vested interest in making her succeed because they recommended her to you. And they don't want to look bad to you as a leader. They're going to buy in and help her succeed. I saw that in the healthcare world with nursing. Nurses, the experienced nurses, the 20+ year nurse, sometimes the stereotype is they're a little stubborn and set in their ways. And you could apply this to any field. And when they weren't a part of the interview process with a brand new nurse out of school, they would say they would eat them alive, put them through the ropes, make them go do the worst tasks, et cetera, et cetera. But once we started putting them on peer panels, and even those strong personalities, put them on a peer panel, they'll start to back off, they'll start to buy in, and they'll want that person to succeed because they don't want to look bad.
Oh, no, that's a very good point about having the buy-in from the team. I like that. That makes a big difference. That's a big part of it. So let's talk about setting expectations, especially when we've talked about leadership. We've talked about recruiting and hiring and partnering with HR, and we're bringing on a new team member. We're putting them in front of, the various levels within the organization, the team members, the managers, and the higher ups. And then you get this person on board. And then how do you communicate expectations, especially regarding what you would like to achieve within the team culture, and also for yourself, and talk about your own behavior as the leader and manager of that team.
Sure. I'll again go back to trust. So number one, start to build trust with that individual. One of the ways that I've done it, and I've used this questionnaire for years, I use a get to know you questionnaire with a new person on my team. Tell me about your recent experience. What are your goals? Where do you want to be 5 years from now, even if it's not here? And how can I help you get there? And then really important questions like, what are your favorite snacks? What's your favorite candy? How do you like to be communicated with? Tell me about the best boss you've ever had. What were their characteristics? Tell me about the worst. What were their characteristics? Because I don't want to emulate that worst boss you've ever had. So it's a page and a half of questions set up for 30 to 45 minutes with that new team member that says, hey, I want to get to know you as a human and a professional and what you want to be when you grow up so I can help you get there. That will help you build some trust into building some clear goals. Say, great, it's great to get to know you, Steve, and thanks for sharing that information. Let's transition and talk about what we're trying to accomplish as a team. Here are some goals that we have. And then here's your part in helping us achieve those goals. Here's who your resources are. I'm here to knock down obstacles for you. But I need you to raise your hand. Think of the basketball player on the court when they said, my bad, coach, I fouled. I need you to raise your hand when that happens and let me know and know that I'm here. And then a couple other things I think for me that have been helpful over the years is having weekly touch bases with my direct reports. I have an hour a week with every direct report, no matter the size of the team. Sometimes that's consumed 20% of my 40 hours a week. That's okay, because I know what's going on. They know they can have access to me, and I can get regular check-ins on progress. So I'd say, build the trust, set the goals, have regular check-ins. And then culturally, I would say setting a tone of permission to fail. It's okay to screw up and make mistakes. We're all humans. We're all going to do it, particularly a new employee coming into a new organization. Lord knows I have over the years. And just giving that permission to fail, permission to mess up, just setting the expectation up front. You know what? You're going to mess up, and that's okay. What's not okay is not telling me about it or not asking for help through it or not learning from it. Just setting that kind of what would be called psychological safety in the literature these days, setting that safe environment where you can try and fail is really important, I think, around meeting goals and meeting expectations.
No, I completely agree. No, that's great. Now, you mentioned about the one-on-one meetings, which I'm also a huge advocate for, and I try to encourage team managers out there to do those one-on-one meetings, because that's really, I think, where you get to really talk about things. And one of the things I believe in those one-on-one meetings is that your team member can come and ask you what obstacles that they may be facing that you can help them with. So I think that's one of the key pieces of that, those one-on-ones. So with that, I want to talk about performance reviews and talk about that annual look at and how someone's performing. So I believe that there's a trend. Some of the companies out there, especially the big ones, are trying to move away from those annual performance reviews and going to the one-on-ones and the monthly feedback. Because the research that I've done is that, as a manager, if you're going to do a performance review, you're probably only going to really focus on the last few weeks. So let's get out of that performance review and do that one-on-one weekly feedback and monthly feedback. So what do you think about the performance reviews and continual feedback?
Yeah. So just for background, so I'm a master's in industrial organizational psychology. So I'm heavy psychology, heavy human behavior. I'm a data nerd. And performance reviews really evolved out of, they go back to the 1800s in terms of history. So, and the way we've been using them today really goes back to the industrial age and manufacturing in some of those spaces. And it's incredibly outdated. And it's terribly not helpful. So I'm a little biased on this. You're right. The trend has been with larger companies who are starting to actually look at research. They're moving away from performance reviews. So what you will find, and you mentioned the one-on-ones and being a fan of those, I certainly am. I even do skip levels quarterly with the layer below my managers so I can get feedback from my managers and how they can be better leaders. Really good leaders have been practicing feedback more frequent than an annual review for many years. It should be an annual review, not an annual surprise, right? Because we're having ongoing conversations if we're effective leaders. So a couple of things that I've said over the years in front of audiences of 200 leaders are, it's more about the conversation than the tool. So it doesn't matter if it's a 5-question annual review, a 100-question annual review. Honestly, I would ignore the tool that the company is using. It's about having the conversation with the individual, which goes back to what? Trust. Having a relationship, being able to say, hey, we're behind on this task. We need to get it. What are the obstacles? How can I help? How can we get there? Who else do we need to bring in? Who do we need to talk to? That weekly conversation is the annual performance review for me, and always has been. So by the time I get to, in an organization that has those, by the time I get to that review, there are no surprises. We have talked about this throughout the year. Furthermore, it's so often correlated with merit increases or bonuses. And you're right, there's a host of biases built into us as human beings from a psychology perspective, such as recency effect. You mentioned that. It's probably going to be reflective of the last 3 or 4 weeks that I remember and have interacted with you, and it's not going to reflect your performance 6 months ago, which may be good or bad. There's a lot of issues with performance reviews. So for me, it's about the conversation, not about the tool. And if you want to go to a deep dive on this topic, Alan Colquitt, he's a PhD psychology guy. He was with Pfizer for many years. He's got a really deep dive book on it, on how old school and twisted our performance review mentality is here in the US and around the world, really. For a less deep dive, but a lot more fun and equally valid from a research perspective, 9 Lies About Work. It's by Marcus Buckingham and Ashley Goodall. I've met Mr. Goodall. it blows up things like performance reviews. It blows up things like competency models and some other things that we just assume because we've done it for 50 or 60 years that that's the way you manage performance. It's not. it's having an individual conversation and relationship with your employee, helping them remove obstacles, facilitating the brilliance inside them to show up at work and make them more valuable to the company. So sorry for my soapbox, but I'm pretty passionate about. They're not terribly useful. If you have to use them, make sure it's not your only conversation a year.
No, I love that. No, that's a great answer. It's a great perspective and a great reminder for all the team managers and leaders out there to try to maximize that conversation every week, more than just the one time a year, and considering what your team member has done, over the entire year. I think we need to have that continual conversation, and those one-on-ones are great.
Very often, and HR is guilty of this, finance is guilty of this, lots of other functions are guilty of this. When we get busy, we start canceling our one-on-ones. And that's the worst time to cancel them. I would hold that time sacred. If your employees come and need it, great. If they don't, great. But there needs to be that regular sacred time of check-in, especially during stressful times for the organization, or, hey, we're at year end, we're trying to do close. All those, the pressure is to give up the one-on-ones. And I think that's the absolute worst time to do it. So I
completely agree. You've got to keep them. Completely agree. And I also believe that the leader and manager needs to block off time for themselves to just think and plan, even if it's a 1 or 2 hour block a week, just to kind of block out that time so they can think about the team's workload, the priorities, what you're going to bring to your supervisor, and just making sure you're thinking about the development of your own team. I think it's so essential. Block it off on the calendar. And so you can just have time to think and walk away from where the work area is. Go grab a cup of coffee and just think.
Yeah, I agree. My practice is I do it for 30 minutes every day. I just block that as a held meeting across my calendar. And it's for me to kind of start planning for the day.
Yep, no, completely agree. So I want to talk about one more tool that manager has, and that's that weekly team meeting to talk about, what the team is going through. Especially, we talked about obstacles a few times. A chance for team members to bring up obstacles, a chance for the manager to talk about team culture and expectations and what's coming up, and communication. And I, again, a huge advocate for constant and clear communication. And don't hold a lot back to yourself. Just move that information into your team. So let's talk about the weekly team meeting and how to really make those successful.
Yeah, the main thing for me, let's assume the foundation of trust, right, is have an agenda. What do you want to accomplish out of the time? That's the number one complaint I hear from poor meetings is there was no agenda. I'm not really sure what we walked away with, and we didn't identify the who, what, when, and where by the end of it. So I would just have an agenda going into it and have some standing items on it. And one of the things that I've learned kind of in the more recent position from effectiveness around meetings is make sure we did what was called a check-in. And this is a check-in where you're doing an emotional check-in and you go around the room. It can take 5-10 minutes at most on the agenda. And it's a couple of questions. One, how are you feeling? A one-word emotional description. Happy, excited, curious, sad, nervous, whatever it might be. And then the next question is there anything distracting you from being fully present with us in this meeting? Yeah, my dog got hit by a car last night, and I'm torn up about it. It was part of the family. Yes, my kid's graduation is coming up, and we've got a plan for a party, so we're trying to get the caterer, and we're trying to get the house set up, and So just get that out on the table so you know how present people are. And then third, asking them, what's your objective for this meeting? What do you want to walk away with in terms of a takeaway? That little check-in exercise really grounds the room. It kind of calms the emotional and the distraction, and it really helps them be more present. It's tough sometimes if you've not done an exercise like that. And I think in order to get people to really participate, you do have that foundation of trust at the individual level. But so that would be number one. Have that agenda and have that check-in as part of the agenda. Have your topics you're going to cover, what you want to achieve, organizationally or team-wise, and then that who, what, when, where matrix. Who's going to do what, by when, what resources do they need, when are we going to get the next update? And just have it out there and publish it after the meeting, send it back out to folks, at least that matrix piece, and say, all right, everybody, here's what we agreed to. If you have any edits, let me know. I found those to be really effective practices with meetings.
No, completely agree. No, I like that being able to have that agenda up front so that at least people know what they're going to talk about. Also, the opportunity to address, issues that they're dealing with, ability to address obstacles so that you can help them. And also, again, and we're talking about communication, sending that team notes out to the team, knowing what people need to follow up on and what issues you need answers on, so that the team can move forward. So
you can always have that other category for any hot topics or urgent issues, within that agenda, so that if there is something critical that needs to derail what you plan to talk about, that's okay. Yeah.
Yep, completely agree. Now that was amazing. Kevin gave some incredible insights on how we can build a better team culture through our leadership. I really enjoyed this interview, so please join me again next week for the next part of this interview, so don't miss it. This episode is sponsored by my course through Finance Leader Academy. It's called Advance Your Finance and Accounting Career, Developing a Promotion Strategy that will set you apart. To advance your career, you must set yourself apart from your peers. Finance and accounting professionals are already expected to be technically competent. This course helps you establish your professional foundation and how you can set yourself apart from your peers by growing your leadership skills and developing your executive presence. You can go to stephenmclean.com for more details on this career advancement course. The link is also in the show notes with this episode. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the Finance Leader Podcast. I am dedicated to helping you grow your leadership because it is leadership that will set you apart from your peers. You can get this episode wherever you find podcasts. Until next time, you can check out more resources at stephenmclean.com and sign up for my updates so you don't miss an episode of the show. And now, go lead your team, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.